you, Lynn. And now I can share, and I'm sharing this. Want to view and go, Chief.
Now I can say good evening, and welcome to our event called Exploring Kurdistan, Yassin Aref's Albany Friends Visit and Report. This event is also being broadcast on Zoom, so welcome to all you invisible Zoom folks too. I'm Gene Finley, the moderator for this evening, and first few announcements as quickly as possible so we can get right to the program. Copies of two books about the Yassin Aref and Mohammed Hussein Albany case of 2004-2006 are on the table. They need to stay here. Those are samples only for you to look through, though. But please take a look at the sheets, which list all the places that you can purchase those books. And it's done in a wide variety of media. So you don't have to get a book, you can do an ebook download, you can get an audio book, you can take those sheets. One book is Yassin's book called Son of God. The other book is rounded up by Dr. Shamshad Ahmad, which details the whole narrative of the case. Also on the table, lots of information on peace action, on coalition for civil freedoms. Please take what you will. Second, a reminder that since the Zoom broadcast will be live, when we turn the program over to you after the presentations, please be sure to speak into the microphone that's going to be available to you. Microphones are very important here. Otherwise, the Zoom audience won't be able to hear you. And I can repeat questions if you're talking from the rear of the room, but we've got to do it into a microphone. When you were entering, was written in 2011. It's about Yassin and Mohammed, and it's called Set Up and Rounded Up. And it was written and sung by Sybil Allison Stock with Roger Mock on guitar. And we want to thank her so much for sharing her music and her activism and her talent with us. We thought that was a very wonderful song, very appropriate to play for you. Fourth, I want to bring to your attention, and there's a flyer on the back table about this. If you like Kurdistan, and you will, there is going to be more Kurdistan for you. It's a photo exhibit with many more photographs about Kurdistan by Carl Strock and Diana Morales Manley. And that will be at the Honest Way Food Co-op at 100 Waterfleet Avenue in Albany on Saturday, March 30th. That's the opening. The opening is from 3 to 6 and refreshments will be served. So please be sure to take a look so you are reminded of the flyer about that on the back table. Finally, we really want to thank so much the sponsors and the co-sponsors of this evening. First, of course, the Albany Public Library and staff. We could not have done this without you for hosting us and doing tech. And to Lynn Jackson, who is the tech wizard who worked with the library to bring all this to you. And also the co-sponsors, certainly Upper Hudson Peace Action, New York State, as well as the Muslim Solidarity Committee, Project Salam, and Save the Pine Bush. Tonight, you're going to get a treat. It's a rare glimpse of Kurdistan, which is the northern Iraq home of Yassin Aref, by a group of Capital District people, all friends, who supported him during a very long and difficult ordeal. Probably all know about the Sting case and what the outcome of that is. Yassin and his co-defendant Mohammed Hussein unjustly convicted, in our very learned opinion, and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. After serving his sentence, Yassin was deported, which we think of as a terrible term. Actually, it was cause for celebration. back to his northern Iraq home in Kurdistan in 2019. And his supporters, lifelong friends, traveled to visit him and learn about Kurdistan last year in 2023. Briefly, the format for the program. The first hour will be presentations by each of the presenters, who are Carl Strock, Ala Muhyiddin, Lynn Jackson, Kathy Manley, and Diana Morales-Manley. Their presentations will include, first and foremost, photographs. So many hundreds of photographs that they took. So as each one speaks, they will be showing photos and slides around what they're speaking about. Then for the second hour, we're going to turn it over to you, the audience, both at Zoom and live, for questions and a little more discussion on some points. So please hold all your questions until the end. For the Zoom people, you'll be able to ask questions by the chat, and someone will read the question so that we will all be on the same page. Excuse me, just a reminder, the library closes at 8 p.m., so we all need to be out of the building by then. So we will want to talk, but we need to be out by 8 o'clock. Now to the program. I am Gene Finley, a photographer, writer, and editor, and I edited and published both of the books you see on the table back, Son of Mountains and Rounded Up, as well as advocated for Yassin Muhammad since 2006. I didn't go to Kurdistan because of health reasons, but that makes me the best person to introduce to you all those folks who did go. I got to see all their pictures first, though. Our first presenter is Carl Strock, a retired columnist with the Daily Gazette in Schenectady, who wrote extensively about the Aref Hussein case as it was unfolding. He will talk about Yassin and Muhammad, the case, and why everyone went to Kurdistan in the first place.
Thank you, Gene. Hit it.
Further, or just
How's this distance right here now? Okay, it's a little closer. Okay, if I move closer or more distant, give me a poke with your elbow. Wait a second. If I get worked up here, I'm liable to start jumping around. Okay. Oh, okay, I'm not going to which a little bit closer. How are we now? Put it up, as you said.
Next slide.
Okay,
Next
it's
slide.
I'm afraid to move now. I feel like I got rigor mortis.
Next slide.
Yeah, I'm not going to be talking about Kurdistan itself so much. My job here is to sort of set the stage for the others to tell you about the trip. I want to tell you how we happened to go, what came first. And you probably know who this guy is that we went to visit all the way to Kurdistan. You probably know that he's one of the two Muslim men who were arrested here in Albany in 2004 and accused of supporting terrorism. Right here, right in Albany, when we were still all shaken from the 9/11 attacks. They were arrested. He was ultimately convicted and sent to prison. I first met him just up the street from here. I'm disoriented, up Central Avenue, whichever way that is. Just a couple blocks up the street at the Masjid as-Salam mosque, where Yassin was the imam or prayer leader. He was out on bail very briefly before the trial, and I was cruising Central Avenue looking for him, looking for the mosque first of all, which I knew nothing about, hoping to find him to be able to interview him. And I driving along, and I spotted him being interviewed on the street. I recognized the TV crew, they're ahead of me, interviewing him. So I pulled over quickly to the curb on the other side and ran across the street to cop an interview with him. And we talked for a little while. And at some point he said to me, "Is that your car?" And I looked, and yes, it was my car. And there was a cop writing me a ticket. I hadn't paid any attention to the legalities of parking in Albany. So I ran over, I tried to stop her and say, "Look, I'm right here." No, too late. She gave me a ticket. So I came back across the street, pretty well disgusted, holding the ticket in my hand, $40 ticket. And Yassin, whom I didn't know, I'd met him 3 minutes before and we were just, going through the preliminaries. And he said, "Give me the ticket." And I said, "No, of course I can't do that. I can't take a gift from somebody I'm interviewing. That's out of the question." But he insisted. He said, "I don't want you to be hurt because of me." He said, "It's my faith." Now imagine that. Here was a guy in very, very deep trouble, right? Arrested, charged with crimes that could get him put away for life, a family to support. He's got very little. And he tells me he wants to pay my parking ticket so that I not be hurt on his account. That's Yassin for you. That's Yassin. That's who we went to see, that guy. He was the target of what the FBI calls a sting, a trap to catch someone. Why was he targeted? We still don't know entirely. It's a secret. Not even Yassin's attorneys were allowed to know, not even the jury. That's how secret it was. The FBI recruited what they called a confidential informant, more accurately, an agent provocateur, a Pakistani lowlife living in this country about to be deported, to do the dirty work with a promise of being allowed to stay in this country if he was successful. He presented himself to Mohammed Hussein, owner of the pizza shop very near the mosque. I believe there's a wine and liquor store there now. Musharraf, originally from Bangladesh, and Malik, fake name of this agent provocateur for the FBI, presented himself as a successful businessman who wanted to help Musharraf out, wanted to lend him money as a brother Muslim, as he described himself. A complicated, "I'll give you cash, you give me checks," sort of interchange of money, laying the groundwork for a money laundering charge, which of course Musharraf had not the least suspicion of, and boasting all the while that he makes a lot of money, every once in a while interspersed in the conversation, that he makes money importing weapons for, quote, "our Mujahideen brothers," which Musharraf expressed no support for whatsoever, and just sort of went right over his head. And then they recruited Yassin as the respected imam of the mosque to witness the transaction, to make sure it's all legitimate, it was all above board. And bam, there you are, a conspiracy to support terrorism. That's what it was, fundamentally. In the anti-Muslim hysteria that still prevailed at that time, and in the theatrical setting at the federal courthouse down on Broadway, complete with snipers on the rooftops, they were convicted. Actually, Yassin was acquitted of most of the charges against him, but a few guilty verdicts were enough. The U.S. attorney asked for 30 years. Both men, of course, were allowed to address the court before being sentenced, this being America, and think, put yourself in that position. What would you have done? Allowed to address a court. Me, I would have begged for mercy if I'd had the strength to speak at all, or I would have choked up, as Musharraf did when it came his turn to speak. Yassin gave the judge a lecture. He was no terrorist. He plotted no violence, and the government knew. And looking at the judge, he said, "And you knew. That's who Yassin is." And of course, he was right. Of course, the judge did know. They all knew at some level. They had to know We can't be sure if Yassin's lecture had an effect or if the community support did, but the judge handed down sentences of 15 years rather than 30. Thank you very much. 15 years for being duped. In my years at the Gazette, I sat through a good many trials and a good many criminal proceedings and saw what I considered a good many perversions of justice. I never saw anything that came close to this case. A full-fledged conspiracy, there's no other word, involving the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the complicity of a federal judge, spreading over a couple of years, which must have consumed thousands of hours of work, millions of dollars in cost, to trick two men who were not supporters of terrorism by any stretch of reality. It was what was expected of them, apparently, if they wanted to advance or protect their careers. They had to catch terrorists. It was the order of the day. And there being no terrorists right at hand in Albany, they invented a couple. It was as simple as that. Well, after 15 years, Mohammed Hussein, a U.S. citizen, returned home to Albany. There he is. Here I am visiting him just a couple of weeks ago. He was in battered health, spent much of his time in prison hospitals. Yassin, after much bureaucratic rigmarole, was deported to Iraq, and specifically to the Kurdish autonomous region thereof. We thought we'd go visit him and give him a welcoming hug on his home turf. Allow me an anecdote. Early in this horrible story, just after the two had been arrested, I visited the mosque during some kind of event there, I don't remember what it was, and tried to talk to Yassin's wife, whom of course I did not know, had never seen. She just glared at me. She was completely withdrawn into herself. A picture, a very dark, dark picture of paranoia. It was just awful to see. It was heartbreaking to see this woman so buried in herself, in fear and anger. I don't know what. It was just awful. When the group of us last year arrived at their home in the town of Chamchamal, and I walked in, Zohor, that's her name, came out from the back and saw me, and she smiled and she said, "Hi, Carl, nice to see you." For me, that was the high point of the trip. I could have gone home at that point and I would have been happy. Should I mention? I will mention just very briefly. I also met very briefly Yassin and Zohur's daughter there. I think she was an 8-year-old kid, and I had never before seen a child, let alone a child in such a difficult situation as this, with such presence. She just stood up and told me what was what, how this was unjust. Her father was no terrorist. She was not crying. She was not fearful. She just gave me a straight lecture. So I can't tell you what a great pleasure and an honor it is to be sitting here next to her today. Allah Muhuddin, who is our facilitator on this trip. Anyway, there they are. You see them on the screen. Allah on one side, her mother Zohur in the middle, and my wife Pearl, who is also on the trip with us alongside. Three magnificent ladies. And Pearl, who's over there filming this behind her cell phone, say she was on the trip principally as my bodyguard. She didn't want me to go. She thought I'd get killed going to Iraq, for God's sake. So she came along. She came along as my bodyguard, and is, I guess, still in that capacity here tonight, just in case. Anyway. Let me show you, if I may, have a couple of minutes, a selection of some of the photos that I took there. It was, that is,
Pearl took this.
should I explain that or? That's Yassin and I pretending to be, I'm not sure what we're pretending to be, a couple of sultans that, never mind the circumstances. I enjoy that photo just for, just for what it is. That is Yassin on the right, my favorite portrait of him. And on the left, taken by Pearl, that was out on the street, an experience I'd never had before in any foreign country. We were, Yassin was showing me around. We were walking the streets, and this guy who was just in a shop, wherever he was, came out, saw me with a camera, and obviously I was a foreigner, and he just welcomed me. Just held out his hand, shake hand, and told me welcome. I've traveled a fair bit in the world, and it's never happened to me anywhere before. Okay. We visited a lake where there was a lot of partying going on. A group of nurses from a hospital, they were playing music and dancing.
Doctors, actually, they
Pearl
were all
got into the
doctors and
spirit of it
surgeons,
along with-
all
what's his
women
name,
doctors,
Steve?
and surgeons, just
What's
saying.
his name? Al?
Siva.
Siva, yeah. Whoop, yeah, let's go back. And no, back to the previous one. Yeah, there. And there's posing in front of a very modern hotel in Suleimania, lest you think people are living in, mud huts or anything. Not exactly the case. The Millennium Hotel in Suleimania, and Pearl proudly presents it to you. We are at a fort, Chum Chamal, right? Chum Chamal Fort. Pearl stormed the ramparts, posing with some graffiti there. Here we were at another fort, and Kurdish men, for some reason, style, I guess, dressed largely in black. And there was a whole bunch of these guys visiting the fort, and I was hanging around behind them trying to get a composition that I thought would be pleasing. And that was the best I could do before they formed themselves into a line to pose for me. People posing for me was absolutely the bane of my existence in Kurdistan. Anytime you try to get a natural picture, boom, everybody drops into formation. My fellow travelers, as well as the native Kurds, and they all line up like soldiers, and it makes for the most dreadful pictures in the world. Gangbangs, I call them. I've got 1,000 of them, which I promise not to show you. This is Allah here in the middle. We're visiting, I think this is one of the cemeteries, right? The mass graves. The museum, you'll see more of that museum later. Okay.
Here.
Graffitied it. Like originally it said guns are allowed. They have to graffiti and.
Oh, I see. That's what that was. Okay, I didn't know. I just sort of liked the arrangement. Allah with one of her companions. And that's Steve in the middle. Steve Downs, who unfortunately cannot be with us this evening. He was planning to be suffering from a bad cold. And I hope he's watching us on Zoom right now. Hi, Steve. Sorry you're not here. And Yassin, of course, and my bodyguard. And this is Lynn, along with the governor of the province, I guess.
Suleimania.
And here we are at one of the genocide museums, which you'll hear more about. That's through her and somebody pointing out photos to you. I won't take up your time with that because you'll have more of that from the, whoop, come back. There, whoop, there. Whoop, come back to the other one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, seeing alone. Yeah, that's it. Whoop. There we go. I want to show you that just because it's one of them, if I may say so, it's one of my favorite photos. I gave it sort of the antique treatment online, but it was Yassin showing us around the remains of his native village by the name of Hashazini, which was largely destroyed in one of the genocidal campaigns waged by Saddam Hussein. And this is an old, now eroded mud wall. And I say Yassin giving us a tour, and I just thought it captured sort of the spirit of the thing rather well. I think we can leave it. I think we can leave it at that point, and I will proudly turn the microphone over to my traveling companion.
Thank you, Carl. Did you want to read the poem too, or we're saving that for
you
later?
Tell me when to do that.
Let's do it afterwards. How
You
do
wanna
we-
do that
Okay,
now?
Lynn is saying let's do it afterwards.
Afterwards, okay.
Yes, we have a very special treat for you. It's a poem that Yassin just wrote, which we all picked up from Facebook, and he decided had to share it with you. So we'll do that at the end. The next speaker is Ala Muhaddin. She is Yassin's daughter, if you didn't already know that by now. She's also a high school teacher in the Albany school system, who works with new arrivals to the country from all around the world. She also fosters kittens through Operation SNP.
Shout out to Lynn Kopka, who's here from Operation SNP, our leader.
It's a nonprofit rescue group in Troy. Ala will talk about Yassin's homecoming to Kurdistan, which she witnessed firsthand, and what that meant for him, his large extended family, and all of his friends here.
Thank you, Jean. So this portion of the presentation is going to be more like a story time. I am considering it practice for my future career as a YouTuber or a TikToker after I quit teaching. So the day my father returned home to Kurdistan was easily, by far, the happiest day of my life. But the events leading up to it were exciting, to put it mildly. So it started on October 4th, 2018. That was my father's official release date after 15 years of imprisonment. He spent a year and a half in solitary confinement, and he spent about another 7 years in communication management units, which are illegally built federal prisons that severely restrict communications. It's like a baby solitary, and they're largely housed with Muslim and Arab prisoners. My dad was transferred out of the communication management unit when he began a lawsuit with the help of Kathy Manley, of course, against the CCR. So when he started a lawsuit against them, he was transferred out, and that lawsuit is still in litigation, largely because it's just being ignored. So I remember speaking to my father on the day that he was released, and he told me that 7 or 8 years before, he thought that this day would never come, but here it was. And it was such a bittersweet moment because we were all thrilled, but we knew that the next step was ICE detention. We knew that he wouldn't be released immediately. So we had concerns about that. So my father was put into ICE detention, and after about a week or so, he had a hearing with a judge, and my father agreed to voluntary deportation. He did not fight his deportation because he wanted to go home, and I can imagine that he didn't want to live in a country that did something like that to him. He asked to be deported directly to Sulaimani, which is a province in Kurdistan, where my family has connections. But the judge said that something like that has never been done, that Iraqi deportees have only ever been deported to Baghdad in the south, and that trying to change the place of his deportation would result in delays. So my father agreed to voluntarily be deported to Baghdad, which is in the south of Iraq, which is under the Arab Iraqi government, not under any sort of Kurdish influence. So then he continued his time in ICE detention, and ICE detention wasn't anywhere near as bad as the CMUs, but it was more restrictive than the general population prisons that my dad had been in for several years before that. And time was just passing, months were passing, and we were hearing nothing about a deportation date. None of us were naive enough to believe that he would be deported on like October 5th, but we were thinking maximum is going to be a month. Like by November, my father will have arrived in Kurdistan. And I don't know if I started with this, but my mother, my sister, and I were already in Kurdistan. We arrived 2 months prior, awaiting, anticipating my dad's arrival. So finally, my dad gets word from an ICE officer that the paperwork was done on their side, but that they were awaiting the Iraqi government's approval. So my father asked me to ask his brothers, who were politicians, if they could get if they could push for that approval because the papers were probably just sitting on somebody's desk somewhere, like being ignored. And I asked them, and they made some phone calls. They tried to get more information, but because they're politicians in the autonomous region of Kurdistan, they really had no connections at all with the Iraqi government, and they weren't really able to do anything. And I was constantly mad at them, constantly accusing them of not doing enough, and they were constantly calling me a stupid American that doesn't know anything about Middle Eastern politics, and there was a back and forth there. But they did what they could, but there was really nothing that they could do. After some more time had passed, like I don't know, weeks or even months, we got word that all of the Iraqi deportees that had, or all of the Iraqi would-be deportees, all of the Iraqi people in ICE detention that were to be deported, had actually been released because the Iraqi government was not coming to an agreement with the American government. But the people who were released were the ones who appealed their deportation, who didn't accept their deportation. Since my father accepted his deportation and was willingly going, he was not part of the prisoners who were released or the detainees who were released. And I was just beside myself. I felt so bad that my father was going through this. And as bad as I felt, I never once heard a single complaint from my father about his circumstances or his situation, and that was true for the entire time that he was in prison. Every single time we had spoken to him, he could have been on vacation calling us to check up on us. He never complained about his circumstances. He never let us worry about him. He never, he just never gave us anything to worry about or to be concerned for, even though I can imagine what he was really going through silently. As time was passing, there was more inconsistencies. At some point, an ICE officer told my dad it would be a couple of weeks and he would be deported, and then weeks passed, then nothing, then months passed.
And I sued them. I sued them.
Yes, I was just about to say that. So it could have been that they were dragging their feet because they wanted to avoid legal proceedings being started against them. And then Kathy sued them. She did a habeas motion. That was in April or May of 2019, right?
Yeah, because you have to wait 6 months.
Kathy says you have to wait 6 months. So certain things have to be done before she could file the habeas motion. So April or May of the next year, she passed the habeas motion. I think the Attorney General asked for more time. Eventually, in June, there was a hearing. And at that hearing, it was strongly implied that my dad would be deported within a week. The U.S. Attorney's Office were saying, just give us one more week, then make a decision to the judge. Around that same time, or maybe a few days before that, so it was June 3rd, 2019, and it was Eid morning. Eid is the big Muslim holiday after the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is coming up soon, actually, in 3 weeks. So on Eid day, an expert declaration was published that said Iraqi deportees were at high risk of torture and detainment, particularly if they had terror-related charges. And again, I was absolutely beside myself with worry. And again, my father did not have a single worry, care, or concern. He didn't show any worry. Kathy said that his brothers and I should try to arrange a lawyer for him. And my dad's like, I don't need a lawyer. I don't want a lawyer. Not necessary. So it's funny to talk about, but my father, of course, he knows how Middle Eastern politics work, and he's more concerned about getting connections, getting people that can vouch for him, that sort of thing. That's a lot more important than getting a lawyer. I called the person who wrote that declaration. He was an American living in Hawler, which is the capital of Kurdistan. His name was Daniel Smith. And Daniel told me that there was a good chance that the people at the airport who received my father's, the security, they would not know about the convictions that my father has or the reason that my father is being deported. So Daniel said that as long as they don't know why my father's being deported, they would just assume, or my father could just say that he lost his legal resident status in the States, which is true, and hopefully be on his way. But if they had some type of alert in their system that would indicate to do further security checks, or that would indicate the reason that he was deported, then that's when things could go very, very bad. And actually, when my mom and my sister and I arrived in Kurdistan, there was an alert in the system because we were questioned for like an hour at the Slemani airport. And the day of my father's release, which was 9 months prior by this point, the Asayish, which is like the Kurdish FBI or the Kurdish intelligence agency, they called my uncle and they said, bring Yassin to us for questioning. And my uncle had to explain that he's not here yet. So I was hopeful that there wouldn't be some sort of alert in the system, but it almost felt like wishful thinking that there wouldn't be an alert. So Daniel talked to me on the phone and he broke down some things to me. He said, number one, get connections. Get connections, get their phone numbers, get people who can vouch for your father. In the Middle East, we have like a kafil system. So if somebody's your kafil, it's like they're responsible for you or they sponsor you. So for example, if you're a kafil and the person who you were a kafil for steals something and disappears, then you would be responsible for paying the damages, that sort of thing. So he was saying get some reliable people, some well-known people that could vouch for him in that way. So my father sent me names of people that could do that. So my uncles helped me my uncles got in touch with those people, got their numbers. They added more people to the list. They sent my father a list. We kept our own list. That was step one. Step two, Daniel said to just have a bunch of articles and evidence and that sort of thing printed out so that we could show the security officers at the time, like, here is a whole bunch of articles implying, like, exposing incongruencies in the case and indicating its fictitiousness, indicating my father's innocence, that sort of thing. My dad also packed a copy of the 2 books that are back there, Son of Mountains and Rounded Up. He packed them into his suitcase and he ripped off the covers. He ripped off the covers because they had his face on it. So if somebody just did a quick check, they wouldn't be suspicious. But in case of questioning, they could read the contents and the contents are in his favor. Daniel also advised that several family members come to receive my dad at the airport so that he doesn't just look like a solo male traveler. It's evident that he has a family that's there to receive him. And he said, definitely don't risk flying back to Kurdistan because of the extra security checks. He said, don't even risk taking a taxi because taxis also come with additional security checks at checkpoints. He said, bring your own car. If you can, as soon as you get your father, just book it back to Kurdistan. So that's what we started doing. I was so anxious, so worried. And really the most important thing was that nobody in Baghdad found out why my dad was being deported. If he was deported just because he lost his visa or something, it's not a big deal. But if they find out he was deported because of terror-related charges, it's going to be a huge deal and possibly lead to further detainment or worse. Then on June 10th, 2019, several days after Kathy and other supporters went to the hearing about my dad's case, my brother gets a phone call from my dad where my dad said the ICE officers told me to pack my bags. So we're all thrilled, and I'm a little terrified too, but we're all thrilled. We're like, okay, today's the day, he's going to be sent back home. What we know is that he gets 1 phone call before boarding the plane. That's the law. They have to give him that 1 phone call. And hours go by and we don't get any phone call. We didn't hear anything. Radio silence. The whole day goes by and we're still hearing nothing. I left work early that day to come home just in anticipation that we might depart to Baghdad. And my uncle is just telling me, like, he's like, whenever you say that we're ready to leave, I'm ready to leave. We can go to Baghdad. So I called Kathy, and Kathy said that we should just go. She said it's likely that they just put him on the plane without giving him the phone call. And even if they didn't, even if he is still detained somewhere, it's better that we're waiting for him in Baghdad rather than take the risk that he reaches Baghdad and we're not there to receive him. So me, my uncle, and two of my cousins just immediately set off on the road to Baghdad. From Chamchamal in Kurdistan to Baghdad in the south is only about a 4-hour drive. In that 4-hour drive, there are maybe 20 checkpoints or more. There were so many checkpoints, all Arabic checkpoints with Arabic soldiers and Arabic police. None of us speak decent Arabic. We were worried about going through those checkpoints. My uncle had not been to Baghdad in 30 years, and my cousins and myself have never been ever. I swear through all of those checkpoints, not a single person asked us, who are you? Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Not a single question. They waved us along and said, welcome. That's it. We breezed through all of the checkpoints. We reached Baghdad safely. And same thing, in Baghdad, everybody was so kind, so hospitable. We obviously didn't know where we were going, so we were asking people for directions to hotels and restaurants. And they would give us the directions, and then they would all say something like, but please don't go to a hotel. Come to my house, stay with us tonight, be my guest. They were so kind. And around the same time that we arrived in Baghdad, Kathy got more information from one of the ICE officers that my father would reach Baghdad sometime between 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. the next day. So we knew that he was in the air, and we had a 12-hour window of when he would arrive. Some hours after that, it was at nighttime for us, which means it was very early in the morning in New York, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning or something in New York around that time. So we start getting calls from relatives in Kurdistan that my father's face is all over the news with the headlines, terrorist named Yassin Aref is being deported to Iraq. And we were like, what is going on? We were so shocked. We're like, how could this possibly have happened? All we were trying to do was discreetly get my father from the Baghdad airport to Kurdistan. And now it seemed like the whole Iraq knew that my dad was being deported, and it was like a super exaggerated charges, headlines. Yeah, so basically what had happened was Kathy, in her excitement, when she found out that my brother got a phone call that my brother got a phone call that my dad was told to pack his bags. She was so excited, she posted a celebratory post on Facebook. Somebody from the Times Union picked it up and wrote an article about it. And this was a person, I think, who is not familiar with the case. The Times Union has done a ton of great articles about my dad's case. But this person, took some facts, and it wasn't a bad article, but it wasn't in solidarity with my father or his situation or anything like that either. But that article was translated to Arabic and then translated to Kurdish and was all over the news. So we were mortified. We're like, well, that's it. Whatever hope we had is gone. Now he's definitely being detained. We're going to be in Baghdad for a week at least, trying to, negotiate my dad's release. Lord knows what's going to happen. We're all freaking out. And I think in New York, everybody was freaking out too. I think nobody slept that night. Kathy, my brothers, everyone at this table, I think, was, super worried about what was going to happen. Then a few hours after that, and at this point, it was very early in the morning for us, the second half of the night, my brother gets a phone call from my dad, finally. My dad was in Bahrain. He had a 12-hour layover. And the reason he hadn't called was because they gave him the call before he boarded to his final destination. And it was like 3 flights to get to Kurdistan. It was America to Istanbul, layover at Istanbul, Istanbul to Bahrain, 12-hour layover in Bahrain. Then it was going to be Bahrain to Baghdad. He had 2 ICE officers escorting him, and he was doing fine. So that was good to hear. And what was even better is we know what time to expect him. So the next morning, we start off to the airport. And the Baghdad airport security is the tightest security I've ever seen ever. Like, Kurdish airport security is very, very tight. You go through several checks. But Baghdad was ridiculously tight. Just the driveway to get from the outside of the airport to the actual airport was over a mile. And in that mile driveway, there was 5 checkpoints. Nobody can actually get inside of the airport unless you have a ticket to depart. You're not allowed to drop off family members, pick up family members, anything like that. But my cousin works at Sulaimani Airport. So he had a friend who worked at the Baghdad airport. So we parked right at the end of the driveway, and his friend who works at the airport drives up in his, very expensive black G-Wagon, and he's so cool. He comes with his Bluetooth and his suit, and I swear, like, he's still on the phone. He gets in the front seat of our car and drives us through and just flashes his badge at every checkpoint, and we just end up at the front door of the airport. So, like, it was amazing. But without him, there was no way we would have been able to get into the airport. Without him, my dad would have had to take some type of terminal outside of the airport where we could have received him. Okay. Sorry.
Everyone is very interested in this. We gotta understand this too.
Yes. So, we got there just as the plane was arriving and people are coming out of the plane, and it felt like everybody came out of the plane and we hadn't seen my dad, and we're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then I saw my dad, and I was telling my uncles and my cousins, I was like, there he is, there he is. And they were like, no, that's not him. They didn't recognize him. They hadn't seen him in 25 years or more. They didn't recognize him. I was like, no, that's him. Trust me. And we start shouting, calling, waving, and he's not looking at us. And he goes to the security, and the security tells him to go sit off to the side. So he goes to sit off to the side. We're like, oh my gosh, it's beginning. They're going to take him. It's all starting now. And we go to the other side. There's like a glass divider. We go to the other side of the glass divider, and we're shouting, Baba, Yassin. And he's not looking at us. And then a janitor comes over to tell us, like, we have to be on the other side of the glass. And my uncle tells him, he's like, please, that's my brother sitting over there. I haven't seen him in 25 years. Just tell him to look at us. The janitor goes, says a couple of words to the passport control, and he comes back with my father. So he just told the passport control, look, his family's there waiting for him. Let him go. And they let him go. And my cousin starts wailing, and my uncle is like, shut up, let's get out of here. Stop it. Don't draw attention to us. And he's grabbing everyone by the arm and rushing us out of the airport as my cousin is wailing. And it was amazing. The reason that we learned on the way up back to Kurdistan that the reason that they told my dad to sit off to the side was they never saw the paper that he had. It was the type of travel document he had. They never seen it before. They were like, what is this? It wasn't a passport. It wasn't a visa. They didn't even know what to do with it. But they ended up letting him go, which was great. Then the 4-hour drive, it's just phone calls. Everybody's calling to say welcome back. And then we can go to the next slide. Sorry.
That's okay. You tell me which slide you want me to get to and I'll get there.
Okay. Oh, so this first picture is of my dad right before we reached Chamchamal. Right before we reached Chamchamal, the picture on the left is of my dad. We stopped and just took a couple of pictures. I think he read a poem. And the second picture is of him in Kurdish clothes a few days later or a few weeks later. That's his first time wearing Kurdish clothes in a couple of decades. And then the next picture, please. This is on our way back to Chamchamal. As soon as we reached Kurdistan, every 10 minutes we were stopping, and there was a group of family and friends at the side of the road waiting for us to receive my father. So literally, like every 10 minutes, we're getting out of the car, everybody's hugging, crying, throwing candy and chocolate. And then we all get back in the car and start driving home, and it happens again. I think that another one. This was like every 10 minutes. This happened maybe 7, 8 times. And then we finally reach home, and we just started having guests, and it was amazing and incredible and nothing like anything I've ever seen. First of all, we had guests stay with us overnight, but other than the ones that were staying with us overnight, every minute from like 8 o'clock until 9, 10 o'clock at night, there was guests coming. There were so many guests that when one group of guests came, the group in the living room had to stand up and leave to accommodate the next ones. We were vacuuming, I swear, 7 times a day. So, there was always 2 girls at the sink washing dishes, 2 girls making tea, and 2 girls pouring tea. And then the boys serving the tea, always, constantly. I stayed home just that night, and then the next morning I went back to work. I was lecturing at a university. I've never been happy to go to work before, but I was then, because staying home would have been double the work of working. So my sister and my cousins picked up my slack, but it was amazing. I would come home and do the same thing through the afternoon and evening, and yeah, we had thousands of guests probably over the course of weeks and months. This is a picture of my father with his sister, who's older than his mother. My father's father was very, very, very old when he had my dad. They think he was close to 70 when he had my dad. So this is my grandfather's daughter from a previous marriage, and she's older than my grandmother. That's my dad with my brother. A family trip. These are just pictures that I was sharing. My father with my brother in the blue t-shirt, and the man in the middle is Ahmed, and you will hear about him later on in the presentation. My parents in Kurdistan. My uncle Mohsen is in the middle, who is the one that dragged us out of the airport. And my brother and my uncle Mohsen again. And these are traditional Kurdish clothes. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. What is the body of water?
I don't know. Maybe Dukan, maybe, but I'm not really sure. I'm sorry.
We had not heard these tales, or at least I had not heard these tales. Probably Kathy did, but we had not heard. So this is all new information to us as well. Our next presenter is Lynn Jackson. She's a database designer and a longtime volunteer for Save the Pine Bush. She became outraged at the injustice done to Yassin early on. She organized events to support him, including a walk to Binghamton, and she met his family. A typical American, she says, I had no passport prior to my visit to Kurdistan, so get your passports, folks, if you want to travel. She will speak on Kurdish hospitality and give a view of what daily life is like in Kurdistan for both Kurds and visitors in both cities and small towns. And I would ask that the rest of the presenters signal Lex when you want him to change the photos so they can kind of correspond to your talk.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Next picture, please. When I asked Allah if we visited Kurdistan, how long should we stay? I was thinking 3 days would be a good visit. Allah responded, 1 month. I thought, 1 month? How could we possibly stay 1 month? We compromised on 10 full days in Kurdistan. Was there really 10 things to do in Kurdistan? Little did I know. Next picture, please. We arrived in Suleymaniye at 2 or 3 in the morning, the only flight from Istanbul to Suleymaniye, and I don't think I'm pronouncing it right. It's American pronunciation.
Kurdish pronunciation is Sleimani.
Sleimani, right? Which I could say when I was in Kurdistan. We arrived at Suleymaniye at 2 or 3 in the morning because the only flight from Istanbul arrives in the middle of the night. Next picture, please. It was wonderful and amazing to see Yassin in person, which I had never done before. I saw him once in jail. I was overwhelmed. I did not know what to say, but I did not cry. I was just too tired. Yassin and his relatives drove us to our apartment. Next photo, please. Allah and Yassin rented an apartment for all of us to stay in. This made a lot of sense as Suleymaniye was about an hour from where Yassin and his wife live in Chamchamal. Yassin and Allah would often stay over at our apartment. And the little room there is, I got my own room and the apartment, which I liked. Next picture. One of the first places Yassin took us was a hotel in Suleymaniye. The restaurant on the top of the hotel was lined with huge windows and turned slowly. Next photo, please. And this is a view of Suleymaniye from the top of the hotel. I think Yassin took us there so he could show us the city. Next picture. This is the street where Yassin lives in Chamchamal. Next photo. This is the gate. So there's a gate in the house. And this is the inside of the gate. And this is a photo of Yassin's living room and his younger brother, Mohsen. Mohsen?
Older brother, 1 year older.
1 year older. The youngest of his brother. Yassin is the youngest of the 4 living brothers. So, let me, where am I? Hang on a second. It was wonderful to see Yassin and his wife again. Zuhur even seemed happy to see us. This is a photo of Zuhur. Next photo, we also met Zuhur's mother. This is Steve Downs and Zuhur's mother. Next photo, we went to several bazaars. There were so many people in the street, but most of the people were men, which I found interesting. Next picture. You can buy anything at the bazaar, and I'm really glad I had Allah with me because the exchange rate was 160,000 Iraqi dinars to 100 American dollars, and I could not do the math in my head to figure out how much anything cost. This is a photo of Yassin took us. Yassin wanted to show us Kurdistan, and he wanted us to meet his family and his friends. And the hospitality shown us was really open. This is a photo of a traditional Kurdish restaurant serving traditional Kurdish food. We were all seated in a small alcove. The floor was covered with rugs, and we removed our shoes to be in this alcove. We all sat around a very low table. So this photo shows Yassin talking to the waiter, and on the right, the man on the right in the black jacket is Sibar, who is a relative of Yassin's and drove us around a lot. Next photo. So this is a photo of, I don't know, I would call it a little water box or a water cube. And wherever we went, we were always offered water, either in a bottle or little water boxes like this. I was so worried about drinking the water. Before I went, I purchased a water bottle with a filter that I could use, but it turned out not to be necessary. I mean, Paula had already told me this, but was I paying attention? No, but I didn't have to worry about the water because we were always offered water. And just to note, when we visited people's homes, we always took off our shoes before we went into the home. Next picture. So now I want to tell you about the wonderful hospitality we were given when we visited someone's house. I will first describe eating a meal if we were invited for a meal. Then I will describe being offered tea, sweets, and fruit after every meal or during our visit. So this photo, let's go back. Go back. This is a photo of one of the first meals we had at one of the houses, and this was Abdul Rahman.
Yeah.
Okay. onto Rahman's house. So, okay, next picture. So this is a photo of the food. So at our host home, we always ate on the floor. To prepare the area for the meal, the host would first roll out a special rug on top of the wall-to-wall carpet that was already in the room. On top of this rug, a thin plastic tablecloth would be rolled out. The dishes were placed on top of the plastic tablecloth. We would sit around cross-legged or kneel around the food. I will admit I found it very hard to sit on the floor. The Kurdish homes we visited usually had a beautiful room set aside just for visitors. I thought this was a wonderful idea to always have a comfortable place in one's house to receive visitors at a moment's notice. Next picture. Kurdish food is served in many dishes. For meals, we started with bean soup, greens, salad, beets, olives, yogurt, and other dishes. Each person would be given a dish for each of these foods. Next picture. Then the main course would often be flatbread and kebabs. I really like the kebabs. For drinks, we often served water in little cubes and given small cans of soda. After the meal was done, leftover food was emptied onto plastic tablecloths. Oh, not yet. And was tightly rolled up. So basically they took the food and anything left over and, you know, the people hadn't eaten everything, tapped it in, rolled it up in the tablecloth, and then like rolled it up really tight and put it in a little bag to throw away, which I thought was very interesting. At any rate, next picture. If we stayed for a meal, we would have tea and sweets afterwards. If we were just over for a tea or a meeting, this is what we would be given. Once we were sitting on the couches, then it was time to talk. We would be served hot tea. So this is hot tea in small handleless cups. The tea was so hot, it always filled the glass to the very brim. I discovered if you poured some tea in the saucer and then drank it, the tea was the perfect temperature. But the hospitality was not over yet. I mean, just tea doesn't cut it. Next picture. At this point, we were often served coffee in small china cups, possibly sometimes a delicious chocolate accompanied the coffee. Then sweets were offered, but we weren't done yet. Next picture. Plates and sharp knives were given to everyone, and huge piles of fresh fruit were offered. The fruits included bananas, oranges, apples, pomegranates, and all kinds of other fruits. Everywhere we went, whether to a family or a friend's house or to a meeting with the general, the governor, or another leader, we would be given tea, sweets, and fruit at a minimum. While we were planning this trip, I expressed to my travel companions that I was really worried about how dangerous this might be. Steve, who couldn't be here tonight, responded that the greatest danger we would experience was overeating. And Steve was so right.
So, hey, Lynn, can we give you a second microphone because people on the Zoom are having a hard time. We'll put two mics by you.
Okay, do we want to switch
No, just keep two mics for.
two mics?
Yeah.
All right, is that better? Can the people in the Zoom hear better? You hear fine, right? What about the Zoom? Anybody in the Zoom?
Wendy? Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Okay. You see, he wanted to show us his Kurdistan. So this is an itinerary of just one day. Now, I don't really have much time left. So I'm going to just tell you one day and on our trip. So we left at like around 9 o'clock in the morning from Suleymaniye and drove to a museum in Halabja. Next picture. And we, after we were in the Halabja, and we went to a museum, we went to the cemetery, we had lunch, then we drove to a small mountain village very near the Iranian border. Some of us went to the the Iranian border, but I declined to go. Next picture. Instead, I joined Yassin's brother, Ibrahim and Isa's wife, Bafrau, and had tea in a shop. So that's Bafrau on the left, Ibrahim in the middle, and Isa on the right. Next picture. And when I say it was a tea shop, it was a tea shop. Only tea was served. Nothing else was served. I have to say that was pretty cool. Then, next picture. Once we were together again, we went to a waterfall. We walked probably a mile or more up to the waterfall. And in the summertime, this is a huge tourist attraction with the entire path lined with shops like a huge bazaar. By now, it was about 5 p.m., and we had to drive back to Suleimania. And next picture, we had a lovely dinner at one of Yassin's friend's house. By now, it was 8:45 in the evening when we started eating dinner, right? We've been gone since 9 in the morning, right? It was a lovely dinner, and the people there were so nice. Next photo, please. Their son could speak English, and it was good to talk to him. So by now, it was 10:30 at night. I was exhausted. Yassin said, "Now we go visit the general." And I thought, really? At 11 o'clock at night, we're going to show up at the general's house? By now, it was way past my bedtime. I was exhausted. However, off we went to the general's house. We arrived before midnight. And this is a photo of the general's palace front door. Next picture. We were ushered into a main room where guests are received. I mean, this is like the living room. This is like where you receive guests. This is beautiful. The room was huge, lined with plush and fancy gold-edged couches. The general sat in the middle. Next picture. Carl went into journalism mode and got out his notebook and asked the general many good questions. The general had commanded some troops and worked on the American side. Next photo. Carl asked him what he thought when he first heard that Yassin had been arrested. The general said he wanted to know who to call to explain the situation so that Yassin could be released. However, someone had to tell him that doesn't work in the American judicial system, unfortunately. Next picture. And here it is, another picture of the general's house. We did not return to the apartment until nearly 1 a.m. We were exhausted. So the 6 of us Americans began to plot a strike. We just had not been able to keep up with Yassin. We had left the apartment. No, too far. Yep. We had left the apartment. No. Oh, that's good. We'd left the apartment at 9:30 in the morning, and here it was at 11 a.m. So we strategized together about staying in our pajamas so we could not leave early again. So I was going to tell you, I have used up my minutes here, and I was going to tell you about our visit to the governor, which was really interesting. And actually, why don't we I'm going to just flip through a couple of things here. So this is the governor of Slimani. I originally thought we would stay for 15 minutes, and we wound up having, he gave us a tour of his offices. His people brought us to a museum, and we had lunch with him. So these are some of the photos, and I just want to, let me see, I'll go back one. I just want to say the one thing the governor said to me that, that's a good one to stay on. I just want to say a couple of things that the governor said, and that was, the most striking thing the governor said was this. He described Kurdistan as an island surrounded by fire. And I thought about this a lot during that day and the rest of our trip. Kurdistan is like an island of peace surrounded by Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq. And this particular governor was really interested in climate change, and he's really has a program of planting trees. It's really very interesting. Next, I'll show the next picture. And of course, I love the I Heart Slimani. Isn't that cute? The I Heart Slimani, New York is there. All right. So I'm going to just say that it was just a fabulous trip. It was a wonderful trip. This is the governor. You can just keep flipping through the pictures and we'll just finish them off. Because it was a fabulous trip. And we did all kinds of really interesting things. And so I think with that, I was going to talk about the toilets. Well, all right, I'll make one comment. Okay, this is a Western toilet, and it has a faucet in the back. If you look, there's a little faucet. And so you can clean yourself with water. It's absolutely wonderful. I want one. And it was really, and if you go back one, they have hot and cold. You can control the temperature of the water. And then if you go one more, this is what Diana called the squatty potty. And I go back and I figured out that if you just look at it like, you know, peeing in the woods, you can do this. And it was really, and actually, I really liked the fact that it was not a problem to find restrooms, especially after we ate so much. And it was because all the mosques had restrooms open to people, which I just thought was wonderful. And they always had a sink and soap, and it was great, and everything was very clean. And I really appreciated that. Okay, we can flip there. So let me see, go another one, another picture. These are just some pictures. Go another picture, another picture. This is Kurdistan. And Zorbash means very good. Thank you so much.
Steve Downs was going to be here this evening, and he is ill, sadly. So he asked Allah to give his presentation. I'll just tell you a little bit about Steve Downs. He's a former chief attorney with the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct, and he was a member of Yassin's defense team for the trial. He helped Yassin write the book, Son of Mountains. I tell you that he got the hardest job translating Yassin's handwriting. Boy, he wrote that book too, while Yassin was in the Rensselaer County Jail before, during, and after the trial. Steve is also chair of the board of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. He was, and Allah will speak on the horrifying recent history of Kurdish genocide, which you may or may not know about, and the striking memorials that the Kurds have built so that they and the world will never forget. Now, I would say just a quick thing. We want to have enough time after you are all done for questions. So remembering that we need to be out of the library by 8. Please, I don't want to interrupt your presentations at all, but if you can keep them shorter, the better.
Steve and I have rehearsed this, so I think we can keep it under 10 minutes. Steve is very careful with his time. So I'm reading Steve's presentation, so I'm saying but I'm Steve. I got to know Yassin when I volunteered to be part of his defense team in 2006. Later, I helped him write a story of his life entitled Son of Mountains. The book is full of wild stories about Yassin growing up at a time of genocide when Saddam Hussein was trying to exterminate the Kurds because Saddam believed they were helping his enemy Iran during the 8-year war between Iraq and Iran. Next. Yassin describes his life growing up in Kurdistan as follows. Eat bread, sleep on the floor, work hard, wear old clothes, sing for life, shout death to dictators, hold my head high, face death bravely. Yassin's stories were so vivid to me that when we visited him, I wanted to see how closely the picture of Kurdistan in my mind from the book matched reality. Next picture. Yassin grew up in a small, isolated village of Hashazini that was later destroyed in a genocidal campaign against the Kurds known as Enfal. That is all that is left of Hashazini today when we visited. And actually, these mosques and homes were all rebuilt after Enfal. The village was completely leveled during Enfal. Here is Yassin's grandfather's mosque, where Yassin's relatives are buried. Here is the other mosque in the village, where on one occasion when Saddam's forces came to Hashazini looking for Peshmerga, or the Kurdish rebel fighters, the imam visited all the soldiers to eat lunch in the mosque while the Peshmerga guerrillas hid under the floor. On the eve of Nowruz, the new year, it's customary to build a fire on a mountain and shout denunciations of dictators. When he was 12 years old, Yassin begged an automobile tire from his brother in Chamchamal, and alone by himself dragged the tire on a bus 100 miles to Hashazini and up to the top of a small mountain. So up to the top of a small mountain. It was raining that night and nobody else was around, but Yassin set his tire on fire. Soon others joined him on the mountain around the fire to hurl songs and insults at dictators. Everyone was proud that he kept the tradition alive. Yassin wrote, "I felt I was no longer 12 years old, but had become the leader that others had followed." Next picture. 6 years later, the genocide started in Halabja on March 15th and 16th, 1988, a couple of days before Nowruz. We visited a museum dedicated to the genocide of Halabja. Saddam's Air Force dropped canisters of poison gas on the city, one of the largest cities in the Slemani province, and killed over 5,000 civilians. These exhibits were all recreations of real pictures taken after the Halabja massacre occurred. They depict people attempting to flee and to protect their children. One of our guides in the museum was himself a victim. He's pictured on the wall in the white burial shrouds as a young boy, because it was assumed that he would not live. Later, he gave me a pin to remember that Saddam actually gassed thousands of the very citizens his government was supposed to protect. Rows of stones mark their graves. The small headstones are all children's graves. After Halabja, Saddam decided to eradicate the small villages like Hashazini and execute their inhabitants because he believed that they sheltered the Peshmerga. This genocide was called Anfal, in which 182,000 Kurds died. We visited the Anfal Genocide Museum in Chamchamal. Here are exhibits showing refugees fleeing from Saddam's armies. Later, Yassin led the city of Chamchamal to liberate itself from Saddam's control by pursuing the civilian population to peacefully rise up and march down the main street to take back their city. Chamchamal was the first city to liberate itself, and that's why it was given the Anfal Museum. Villagers were put in trucks and taken to mass graves where they were executed, and some were buried alive in. In Chamchamal, Yassin and his friends saved hundreds of villagers by stopping the trucks with obstructions on the road and persuading the villagers to jump off and hide. Later, Saddam's army attacked the region and drove the surviving Kurds into the mountains and into Iran behind Halabja, where they had to survive without food or shelter. America had promised the Kurds protection, but failed to deliver. Here we visited the mountains and villages on the Iranian border where the people fled. So the other side of those mountains is Iran. The Red Prison in Slemani was one of Saddam's prisons that was notorious for torturing and killing Kurds accused of aiding resistance against him. In Slemani, we visited this museum, the Red Prison, it showed the torture that people were forced to endure in Saddam's insane quest to find Peshmerga. This hall is made up of 182,000 shards of broken mirrors representing all of the victims of Anfal. And these are pictures of real tanks that Saddam used to take down villages in Anfal. And during Anfal, all 5,000 Kurdish villages were completely, totally leveled. In Son of Mountains, Yassin writes, although I lived through Anfal, I lost my village completely. At least 75 people in Hashazini died in Anfal. A tenth of my relatives, hundreds of my friends, and thousands more that I knew died among its victims. Each of them could have been the basis of a Hollywood drama or film, if they had been from the West. But we are an unknown people. We live alone and we suffer alone. We die alone. For over 50 years, Kurdish blood has been running like a river, and the same is true of Palestine, now more than ever. So where was the intervention of superpowers? Where was the UN? Where was NATO? Where were the seekers of peace and justice? This is a photo of Marf Gul. He's Yassin's cousin, and he was an international civil rights lawyer who also came from Hashazini. He was the first to document the genocide in English and bring it to international attention. Now Kurdistan is seeking to have the Kurdish genocide recognized by international organizations with the hope that it may prevent such genocides in the future. After Marf Gul died, it was decided to build a museum to genocide outside of Hashazini. We visited the site. The museum, when finished, will be another monument to the grief and horror that the Kurdish people have endured some 40 years ago without significant international recognition or intervention from the West, and particularly America. The Kurds' perception of their international isolation, I think, provided some context for the very warm welcome we received. On the left is a picture of us on the mountains that border Iran, and on the right is a picture of us in a mountain called Karadagh, which has a 4,000-year-old carving of a victorious Kurdish general. The Kurds have suffered much from invasion, but in the end, they are always victorious. The end.
So much. Those are not easy pictures to look at. Our next presenter is Kathy Manley, who is a criminal defense attorney, an activist, and a long-term friend of Yassin's. She specializes in appeals, many of which she's done in her position as legal director of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms. She will speak on the complexity of Kurdish politics and the generals and the governors and the chiefs they met and talked with in Kurdistan.
Yeah, it'll probably be a kind of simplified version of Kurdish politics because I'm certainly not an expert in it. All right, next slide. So this is, I first learned about the Kurds in Yassin's book, Son of Mountains, and we did meet many of the people in the book. The Kurds are the largest ethnic group with no state. And you can see it's kind of a contiguous area within Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. And there's a long history of betrayal of the Kurds. So they say our only friend is the mountains. During the breakup, just as one example of the betrayals, during the breakup of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, Western powers promised a Kurdish state, but broke the promise, as has happened many times since then. Next slide. Oh, there was, okay. Yep. So that's just showing about the mountains, which we've already seen some of, Yassin and, okay. So this is a map of Iraqi Kurdistan, otherwise known as Southern Kurdistan, which is the most independent of the different Kurdish areas. It's semi-autonomous, as we mentioned, and has a Kurdish regional government, which was formed after 1991 when there was uprisings, popular uprisings throughout Iraqi Kurdistan. And Yassin led the one in Chamchamal, which was, I guess, the first city to have the uprising. So next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the Kurdish political party, Iraqi Kurdish political parties. The two biggest ones are the PUK and the KDP. The KDP was formed in 1946 and the PUK was formed in 1975 and is to the left of the KDP. Although I've found that it's more of a geographic distinction because the PUK is mainly in the Suleimani area where we were, whereas the KDP is mainly in the Erbil or Halir. They're the same name for the big city in the other area of Kurdistan. And so and I'll talk about the other parties later, but there's a bunch of checkpoints in there. Next slide. Oh, that's okay. So PUK, go back a little bit. This is Mohsen, Yassin's brother. He's very big in the PUK, now retired. And also the brother Ibrahim is also like a PUK guy. So that was helpful to us. Next slide. Because at one point, Carl and Pearl and I were driving with Ahmed, one of Yassin's cousins, who's also a taxi driver. So he was just driving us back to Suleimani, to our rooms, to our little place there late at night. But he didn't have since he wasn't doing it as a taxi at that point, he didn't have the paperwork that you're supposed to get to go through the checkpoints as a taxi. So we got stopped and they demanded our passports. We didn't have our passports with us. Steve was smart enough to always carry his, but I didn't. And Carl had his on his phone, but wasn't quite the same. And nobody there spoke any English. So it was kind of scary for a little while. And Ahmed didn't speak any English either. But it turned out that he had gotten Yassin on the phone and Yassin had talked to the people. And because they know all the PUK people there, they let us through. Anyway, that was us as we got released from the checkpoint, even though we didn't have our passports.
Ahmed was the cousin that I showed a picture of earlier, and I said he's coming up later in this story. But I know you saw a lot of faces.
Okay, next slide. So Lynn talked about when we visited the governor. And the governor is from the Goran party, which Goran means change, and it was the party that split from the PUK around 2009. And I liked him. I'm not usually into politicians, but he was talking about things like literature and protecting the environment, and he had lunch with us, and he would just walk around the bazaar, and everybody would come up to him and talk to him, and he was just, you don't see that a lot. What?
We would just give
He would
people
give
money.
money, but not in a bribery kind of way, like really poor people, like, anyway. And he said, he wished the Americans would treat Kurdistan more as a partner than as a child. And, maybe stop betraying them all the time. But one thing that Yassin told me is that, yeah, so he got elected governor, but his party and him and the government there doesn't have the real power there. The Peshmerga do, the PUK Peshmerga, because at one point, there was an adult business opened up there that the governor allowed the Goran party, but it was very culturally unpopular there. People were just not into having it there. And so the day after it opened, Peshmerga showed up and it shut down that same day. So it just tells you like kind of who has the real power there. And next, there's a couple more slides. There's Yassin with the governor and a couple of books that the governor gave us. And there we are eating lunch with the governor. And at lunch, I was trying to learn Kurdish, and I accidentally told the governor that the food was very betame, and that means without taste, when I meant to say batame, which means very tasty. And they were like kind of laughing. But then I got to explain Yassin's case to him too, so it kind of redeemed myself, but not in Kurdish. I could not do that in Kurdish. Okay. Okay, so yeah, this is a tribal chief that we visited. As in many tribal societies, tribes also play a role in politics by mobilizing their members to come out to vote or defend or oppose certain initiatives. And they also provide like social services. So we visited the new guest house of the Hamoan tribe, since Mohsen is friends with the chief. And I guess next slide. Okay, yeah, so this is again, the chief on the right there. And I think that's his grandfather up above there, who was also chief, going back a ways. And I think travelers can stay in this guest house, and they provide a lot of meals to visitors too. Next slide. And they take in refugees. So these are some refugee kids. I think some Arab refugees, maybe from Syria or from other parts of Iraq, that they took in, and they give them work, or the kids, some of them are too young to work, but they're there with hopefully with their parents. All right. Next slide. So this is when we visited the general, and the reason that we visited the general is because in that 1991 uprising that Yassin started, he started it with 3 of his friends. The general was one of them. And so we visited him. And after Saddam's defeat, some Kurds joined the Iraqi army, and that's how come he got to be a Kurdish general in the Iraqi army. Because at first I was like, how can that be? That doesn't make any sense. The Iraqi army is Arab, but then Yassin explained that to me. So next slide. All right, yeah, this is that picture of when we visited that day, that really, really long day that Lynn was telling you about. When we visited, the guy on the far right there, next to Yassin, is another of the friends that Yassin started the uprising with in 1991. And so we visited him also, and he lives in a town called Bazian. I don't even know his name, but he had a sad story, which I probably don't have a lot of time to talk about, but they had another son besides the son that's in the back there. And he had tried to immigrate to Italy and ended up drowning on a boat, and like made this call as the boat was sinking, and it went viral. It was just really sad. And that hadn't happened not too long before we were there. Next slide. And this is the third friend of Yassin's that he did the uprising with in 91, Lokman, Kak Lokman. And he is with one of the main Islamic Kurdish political parties, the IMK, Islamic Movement of Kurdistan, which is where Yassin worked when he was a refugee in Damascus in 1999. Probably Lokman got him that job. So we visited the IMK office in Sulmani and also went to lunch with him. Next slide. That's the men eating lunch there at that table, and Lokman's on the left there, and there's the women. We could have gotten a table too, but I don't mind sitting on the floor. And the food was really good. We wanted to bring some of it back to eat on the plane, but we forgot it. Next slide. So, okay, then we also visited Ali Bapir, who had been a leader in the IMK, but later split from it around 2000 to form another group called Komal, which is based in Erbil, the other big city in the yellow zone, which is the PDK zone, but he's with Komal. And he's very popular. The group runs a lot of service projects, including running several hospitals, and they feed a lot of people, including a lot of widows and orphans all across all of Iraqi Kurdistan. So I guess those two slides were combined. In March of 2003, US forces attacked this Ali Bapir's group and killed many of them, even though they weren't fighting against the US. And it might have even played into Yassin's trial, because there was, I don't even want to get into that, but it came up a little bit in Yassin's trial. But later that year in 2003, US forces arrested Ali Bapir and held him in a prison with members of Saddam's forces that he had been previously fighting against as a Kurdish Peshmerga. Luckily, he survived that. He was held for a couple of years and wrote that book called Victory Through Adversity. He gave us all three of those books. The one on the left is his memoir, and the one on the right is his denunciation of extremist groups like ISIS. And then I just wanted to end by saying that unfortunately, Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, in addition to unleashing so much death and horror there, has also led to various attacks across the region, including Iraqi Kurdistan. Last month, Iran fired missiles into Erbil, killing several people, including a rich businessman and his daughter and housekeeper. And they claimed his villa was an Israeli outpost, but there's no evidence of that. It seems like they were just afraid to actually attack Israel or the US, so they attacked this guy, civilian businessman in Erbil. Because of attacks by Iranian-supported groups on US forces and what seems like a very disproportionate US retaliatory strikes on various groups in Iraq and Syria, killing civilians as well. The Iraqi government's been pushing to get the rest of the US troops out. And it seems like most people in Iraq want those troops out. Some of the Kurds don't. Some of the Kurdish parties might want the troops there, but some don't. And I don't know how the overall population in Iraqi Kurdistan feels about it. I think they have some sympathy for Gaza and must understand that the US is complicit in that genocide, which they understand all too well, having been through Kurdish genocide. Thank you. I'm really
Thank you, Kathy. Our last speaker, but certainly not the least, is Diana Morales-Manley. She's a residential counselor at Northern Rivers, working with children who are experiencing trauma. She's also a professional photographer and artist. She said she jumped at the opportunity to travel to Kurdistan to meet Yassin in real life and have the photographic adventure of a lifetime. She's going to speak on the family relations that she observed within Yassin's large extended family and how these form the basis for just about all the interactions in Kurdistan.
Thank you. Lex, you can just kind of go along as I speak because they're not like, they're kind of in order, but not really. So one of the things that struck me was the family relations and the goodness of heart in the Kurdish people. In the US, for contrast, we have whole institutions dedicated to caring for the elderly, nursing homes and assisted living facilities. In Kurdistan, I'm not sure such a place even exists. families care for each other throughout a lifetime. Parents, of course, take care of their children. And then when they grow up and then they grow up and the parents become elderly, the grown children take care of their parents, and they all usually live together in the same home or in a two-story home. Everyone we met went from a stranger to a friend. They would be inviting us into their home for tea and fruit and to talk, even with the language barrier. They really did want to talk to us. They were the most hospitable people I've ever met. I had observed no homeless people at all while we were exploring different cities and towns. Not to say there aren't any, but we didn't ever see any. The Kurdish people take care of each other no matter what. No one goes without the basic necessities needed to live. And I think that speaks volumes to the kind of people the Kurdish people are. They're good and kind-hearted. And then to transition to our adventures, I could go on, and we don't have that much time. We had adventures every day. So I'll just share a little tidbit that I thought was cool. When I knew I would be staying in primarily Suleimania, I started researching it and things to do, as you do when you're visiting a new place. I found a cool looking hike to a waterfall. Then I realized it was 2 hours away, which I thought would be too far to even suggest it. And side note, that's a funny thought because no amount of hours kept us from doing anything at all. We traveled like 4 hours away to get just to go, explore a new city. So then I read the reviews, and almost all of them said things like, it's too crowded, it's not worth it. The view is okay, but it's too crowded, you won't even get a good picture, and things like that for the waterfall. So between that and how far it was, I had put it out of my mind. But then one day we were on our way to hike a waterfall. I hadn't realized it was the same one that I had found online until we actually got there and I saw it. But what was really interesting about this hike, for contrast, when you go on a hike somewhere around here, you're usually pretty secluded in the wilderness, right? I mean, there's no stores or hotels on the hike. That would be unusual. But there was on this hike. The hike was up a mountain face with the creek coming down from the waterfall, and there were literally tea shops, hotels, and restaurants built into the mountain, like built into the rock. It was insane. It was one of the most incredible and strangest things I'd ever seen. And fortunately for us, it was the off season, so we had the whole place to ourselves, and all of the tourist shops were closed. The view was beautiful, as you can see here in the last one. And yeah, every day of the trip was truly an adventure. We did so much. It was amazing. I learned so much and I enjoyed every part of it. And there's just more pictures. I'm a photographer, as Jean said. I took thousands of photos. I hope you guys will come see them at the co-op. Me and Carl are both photographers. So if you're interested, come see the show. It will be up for about a month.
Thank you so much. One last part of the trip. Carl is going to read a poem that Yassin has written just, I guess, in the past, not even a week, that was posted on his Facebook page. And we all saw it and we all marveled at it and we thought you would like it.
This is translated. I understand, right? Did you translate it, Ala?
Dad translated it and I just fixed a couple typos. I think actually what happened was it was really poorly translated on Facebook.
Yes.
And Dan was like, what on earth is this? And my dad retranslated it and posted it in the comments.
Okay. I was born a stranger. As a child and as a youth, wherever I was, I always felt I was a stranger. My heart never found its people. My mind never found its company. My soul didn't find its mate. After 25 years away from home, mostly in imprisonment, with much hope and some fear, I returned to my country to find that just like my face, everything had changed. My land, my people, nothing is the same. Isn't it strange? I can't understand why I look like a stranger in people's eyes. Even in my own hometown, sometimes as I wandered in the streets, people came and asked me where I was from. That question shocked me to a point that I don't know how to respond. If in the place I called home, I look like a stranger to you, where do I belong? I am a vagabond, without a state or flag. If your heart cannot be my nest, where can I find a place for my mind to get some rest, for my heart to get some peace? Wherever I've gone, in the East and in the West, I was always a stranger, never had my own home, never had my own identity, and I am still a lonely wanderer and stranger, even in my hometown, even in my country. Which if I can comment, here, I read this poem and it took me completely by surprise. I mean, I thought of him as a Kurd. We visited in his home country and he seems to be immersed in Kurdistan, immersed in his family and his relatives and his friends. I was really surprised to read this poem, him describing himself as a stranger. Can you clarify that, Allah?
I don't know. He's a mysterious guy.
But he's very popular there. If you see his Facebook, like he has tons of followers there.
Yes.
Seem to love him there. So even if he feels that way, you go away for so long and come back, everything's changed. That's true.
All right, we are ready for questions.
There's
But
one from the Zoom that maybe Ala could answer.
okay,
We should get a wireless mic to Wendy though, so that the Zoom audience can hear.
is it okay?
What did they say?
They need.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay.
You could take it out of the stand.
And then when you're ready to ask questions, don't ask them until the microphone gets to you. Because remember, we've always got the Zoom people who need to hear too.
Okay, so from the Zoom, early on, a question for Carl about one of the pictures. Was the photo of the city center hauler Erbil from the Citadel or just in Sulian Maya?
Okay. So.
Oh, actually, I
The
think I know the
photograph-
answer to that. So the question is,
Yes, thank you.
was the picture from the Citadel? So one of the pictures, the picture of the men in black was from the Citadel in Erbil. So that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. Another question from the Zoom. Wondering about women's rights in Kurdistan. Can women walk out on their own without being harassed? Uh-oh. I just lost my chat. Something changed up there.
It said, are they in professions?
Something just happened to the, okay.
Yeah, the rest of that question was, and are they in professions? And now I can answer that she lived there.
Yeah, I lived there for a year. So as for walking out without harassment, like I lived in Albany my whole life and I've worked in downtown Albany. I grew up in Albany and I've never really been comfortable walking outside after dark, especially not alone. I have never once been uncomfortable walking alone at night in Kurdistan. One time it was even like 2 o'clock in the morning and we had guests at our house staying overnight and somebody's husband was joining us like really, really late that night. And I just walked out like out of my block, like several blocks away onto the main road. My dog was in front of me, barking at all of the trucks passing. I've never been uncomfortable walking in Kurdistan, not even alone. My sister and female cousins and I would have no problem walking to corner stores at any distance from our house at night, driving out into the bazaar. Shops are open very late in Kurdistan. Like you can go out and get ice cream past midnight. You can go out and get a lot of things like very late at night. It's a very night culture, and we never had any problem traveling at night. Even traveling to Slimani, which is like an hour away, I would just go with my sister and my female cousins. It's just us. We had never had a problem, not at checkpoints, not on the road, not in the streets, nothing. So absolutely, women can travel alone without harassment in Kurdistan. And as for having professions, I used to work at a university. I was an instructor there, and the majority of our students were female, like probably 70%. Like there was definitely a gap in the female to male population. And I think that's something that's common at universities. Kurdish women are highly educated and have every, professional job that you can have. Doctors, engineers, everything. So yes, absolutely.
2 more questions from the chat.
Okay, let's
Okay.
do a couple of questions here from the floor and then we'll come back to the chat. Who has questions? No one. Okay, hang on. She's coming to you with the microphone.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you again for telling your father's story and for everyone that worked on this case. So I had a question regarding the law team. So when you were working on this case with all the years involved in the dedication, were you simultaneously working on other cases that were equal? I mean, not equal, because you said this one case was kind of unique and more extraordinarily difficult, but were you simultaneously working on other cases? Was that possible?
Yeah, from the time I read the trial is in 2006. I mean, we were totally focused on this case. Before that, from 2004 to 2006, I was working for Terry Kinlan and working on this case, but other cases too, but a lot on this case. And then I worked on the appeal for a really long, focused on, probably Terry would get mad at me because I wasn't working on my other cases till the appeal was done, and then we lost the appeal. And then after that, it was more sporadic. We would try to find some way to try to argue it again, and we couldn't. And and then I got involved in other similar cases along with Steve. But so I did work on other cases, but also a lot on this one during certain time periods, especially. What? Oh, and then,
But now we have a database of about 1,200 cases that are similar to Yassin's. And in some ways, Yassin was lucky. He was lucky because he only got 15 years, as opposed to some of the cases that we're familiar with that people essentially got life in prison for the same kind of nonsense that Yassin was arrested for.
And
Yeah,
somebody in
there's
the
some-
comments is asking if that's still possible. Does legislation still exist that allows people to be arrested and imprisoned without due process? That's the question.
well, I could talk for hours about that. I mean, we don't think he got due process, but the court said he did. But I work with the Coalition for Civil Freedoms on all these other cases of entrapment and material support cases, classified evidence. There's information back there if anybody's interested. There's a brochure and a few other things, including a bill that we drafted to try to remedy some of these things, but hasn't gotten too far anywhere in Congress yet. But yeah, people are still convicted very unfairly in these kinds of cases.
Any more questions from the floor? Are there more questions from the Zoom? Okay.
I'm going to combine a couple. We could save maybe one for last. How is Yassin doing today? Another question regarding women's rights. Can you talk about women in the Kurdish army? Or is that just in Syria? And what are the universities like in Kurdistan?
So as for talking about women in the Kurdish army, I don't know too much, but I know that there are all female units of Peshmerga. And that was mostly during the time of ISIS when we were really at war trying to protect our borders from ISIS invasion. I don't know too much more than that, than they exist. They're there. And what are the universities like in Kurdistan? So the system is a little bit different. 12th graders take a very difficult days-long government exam, and their scores on that exam determine whether they can go to a public university or not. So if they go to a public university, then of course the government is subsidizing it, and that's the ideal. Their score on that exam also determines which department they can get into. So to get into medical school, which is like a 6-year program straight out of straight out of high school, you have to get like a 99 on that exam. So it's very difficult to get into. And then if you can't get into a public university, then you have to pay to go to a private university if you want to pursue that route. The university system is also a little bit different than here. Here, I think we focus a lot on gen eds for year 1. In Kurdistan, you're focusing mostly on courses that are very specific to your department. You take classes with the same people in your department. Kind of like the department has a path that's chosen for them by the university. There's not as much freedom to choose your courses and your path as there is here. But it's very nice. I really, really loved working at that university. I think universities in general are very open, liberal, welcoming spaces. And it was honestly the best work experience I ever had. I loved my colleagues. I had like 300 students. They were all great. But it was a lot of fun. It was very much a learning experience for me, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Yes.
I'm just curious if you could make a comment on the non-tourist life. Did you go to a grocery store, for example? What's the price of a gallon of gas? What's I don't know, what's day-to-day life like there? And can you make any comments?
Yeah, so for some things, you could go to mini markets, like right on your block. But for groceries like fresh fruits, vegetables, meat, you would go to the bazaar for that. And food is ridiculously, ridiculously cheap compared to here. Like I remember being in Kurdistan the first winter I was there and buying like a huge case of pomegranates for less than $5. Meanwhile, I can go to Price Chopper and get one pomegranate for $5. So it was really shocking to me. The fruits and vegetables and fresh foods are very, very cheap. Gas, shockingly, and oil, even though Kurdistan is like, on top of a river of natural gases and oils, but it's not a huge difference in the price. One thing that's kind of cool is sometimes you see people selling gasoline on the side of the street that they're bringing in usually from Kirkuk. Kirkuk is known to have the best quality gas. So people buy it from Kirkuk and sell it for a slight upcharge on the side of the roads, which is kind of cool. There's no you don't need a permit to sell anything. You just pick up, go on the side of the road, do what you do. Nobody takes taxes for anything. Like you don't pay income tax, you don't pay tax on your property, there's no school tax. Very, very few places in Slimani and Hawler, restaurants have started charging taxes. But it's really there's no tax. You have a home, it's yours. You have property, it's yours. Nobody can take it from you. It'll stay with you and your family. So that part's kind of cool. And also, even though nobody's paying taxes, the roads still get cleaned. The garbage men come every day. They don't come once a week. The garbage men come every day to pick up the garbage. The government sends water once a week or whatever it is. Electricity is subsidized. Electricity is subsidized, water is subsidized. Universities, like we just said, are subsidized. Healthcare is subsidized. So even though people are not paying taxes, the government is still taking care of the people, not as well as they should. They could be doing more. Right now there are, well, they just ended, but there was a massive teacher strike because teachers were not getting their full wages for a while. So there was a massive teacher strike. The school year started very late. So the government is not doing as much as it can, but it is still doing a lot for people, considering that people are not paying taxes. And it was very eye-opening for me because I'm like, what am I paying taxes for? And paying for everything else too. Like, what's the point? But yeah.
But the electricity situation isn't that great, right? There's
So
only
compared to
on-
American standards, it's not that great, but by Middle Eastern standards, it's good. It's good. No, it's not just great. It's like, I mean, it's not bad at all. My friends that come from other parts of Asia, when they tell me about their the electricity problems that they have, it's like Kurdistan is really doing good comparatively.
I guess you get used to like the power just going out in the middle of while you're having dinner or something, it would go out and everybody wouldn't even react, like even if it's like all of a sudden dark and then
Yeah.
sometimes there's a generator. I guess you just get used to that. We kind of start to get used to it after a while.
Just before we came, just before I came here tonight, we've all been talking about things that we saw there. And it occurred to me to ask myself, what are some of the things that we did not see in Kurdistan? One of the things we did not see, I made a very short list. We did not see people sleeping in the streets. Was not aware of any homelessness. We did not see any bars. I did not see any people wearing shorts. I didn't see any people with tattoos.
Yes, you did.
Did I? Tattoos?
A little bit.
I was thinking back, I didn't see, well,
My grandmother has tattoos, Carl, on her face. Yes.
how did I
Go back to a picture of my grandma.
I didn't have
Wow. I see that. Well, sorry, that's what.
Oh, what is the nature? Was that something from tribal?
Yes, so culturally, like Kurdish women would have like 3 dots either on their chin or their wrist or something like that. It's just like a cultural thing. Tattoos are not okay in accordance with Islamic law. So nowadays, that doesn't happen so much anymore, at least not with, girls, but a lot of people, like just teenagers, young people, think it's cool and get them. So like I have cousins with tattoos of just dumb things on their arms.
I beg your pardon. I'm glad we've got you as consultant. I thought about this afternoon, I was trying to think, what did we see? And I thought that's one of the things I don't remember seeing.
Remember, Seafire was going to take you guys to get a tattoo, a matching tattoo.
Convinced me.
Well, I also remember people had nose jobs, right?
Yes.
Which I don't really understand that at all, but
Well, they learned that from Iran, to be fair. But oh yeah, nose jobs are very popular.
My goodness.
No.
Nose jobs like rhinoplasties.
yeah, so basically you would go somewhere and and I would think good-looking young person would have like a white bandage over their nose. And Allah explained that they have to wear that for a number of weeks after the surgery. So, and there were quite a number of people we saw with these white bandages on their
I
noses.
didn't know what that was.
I thought their noses looked perfectly fine, but
Well, now. Yes, yes. Okay.
Somebody in the comments is asking if she would finally be able to send mail to her Kurdish friends these days. So from what I know, people send mail through things like FedEx and USPS, and then it goes to the FedEx or USPS office, and the people would have to go pick it up from there. So it's like not going to get delivered to their doorstep. They have to go pick it up from an office. But yes, absolutely. There are offices in Sleimani and Hawler. Hawler is Erbil. And I'm not sure where else. But if you could contact your friend, they might be able to tell you where they can pick it up from.
Hi, a couple of, one comment and one question. The question first. How are women represented in the governing bodies of Kurdistan?
I wish I knew more to tell you. I don't know that much. What I do know is that there are women politicians, both in the governing bodies of Kurdistan and Iraq. There has to be like a certain number. So the way that these parliaments are set up is there has to be a certain number of women, there has to be a certain number of men, a certain number of Arabs, Kurds, Turkmen. So everybody has to be represented, a certain number of Christians. There has to be representation for them in the parliament. So it is built into the system.
Okay. I just was curious, and secondly, the resilience of the Kurds is remarkable, and that's a vast understatement. I'm so glad I came tonight because it's really brought to light so much in my mind that I was not aware of. So I want to thank everybody who presented and everyone who participated in putting this together.
Thank you for being here.
That would have been a wonderful ending. Thank you so much for that question, but we have one more really good question from the Zoom, and that is, how is Yassin doing? So I guess we're back to Ella one more time.
Dad is doing great. He is very busy writing books, hiking mountains, playing soccer. He plays soccer like every night. I think he's on 2 different soccer teams, one with people kind of his age and one with like people 20, 25 years younger than him. And he holds his own. Physically, he's in great shape and in good health. And he's published numerous books since he's been out of prison. He's published books on poetry. He published part 2 of Son of Mountains, which talks about his life in the prison, so his 15 years in the prison, that has been published in Kurdish, and we are working on a translation and hoping to get that done as soon as possible. Yeah, he's doing good. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I have to say, I was really happy to actually see Yassin in, I mean, in some ways working, I mean, I'm just a person. I'm not a lawyer. I just got involved. And to meet him in person, he's this really nice guy. Like, he's really nice. And he was so good. He was so good to us. I can't even explain it. And it's kind of like, in some ways, he was sort of an abstract concept because I never actually, unfortunately, if you get put in a federal prison, you're not allowed to make new friends during your incarceration. I could not visit him because I did not know him before he got arrested. So I was not permitted to visit him. And that was very frustrating for me. So to actually see him in person and to see him, I think what really struck me so much is to see him in his element in Kurdistan and to see him in this country with his people and his family and his friends, because the entire government plot was about some plot in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is about 1,000 miles from Kurdistan, but culturally, it might as well have been like on the moon or something, because the Kurdish people, what we experienced in Kurdistan was very Kurdish, a very different culture than what Pakistan would be. And the idea, it's like, doesn't the FBI know that there's a lot of different countries across the ocean, and that there's a lot of different countries and people and different cultures, and that like the whole, like, if I wasn't mad about Yassin's case before I went, I got madder after I went, because I realized if the FBI had like one iota of understanding of the Kurdish culture, they never would have done this, because it made no sense to begin with, but the plot made less sense after I saw Yassin in his country, in his beautiful, beautiful country of Kurdistan, where people were so welcoming. I mean, I was overwhelmed with the hospitality of the people in Kurdistan. Everybody, Ala didn't really talk about this, but when we were there, she held on to her father's phone for a while. Every now and then she would hold his phone. The phone buzzed constantly, right? Constantly, because everyone wanted us to come and visit them. Even when we went to visit the general in the middle of the night, the general's like, well, can you come back for dinner? Can you come back for lunch? It was like, people just, everybody wanted to see us. It was unbelievable and overwhelming. So if you want to go, if you're a typical American like me, you don't have a passport, I say, go get your passport, go visit Yassin in Iraq and Kurdistan. You will have a fabulous time.
Somebody in the
I
comments
just-
has asked, how can we seek to not fail the people of Palestine the way that we failed the Kurds during the genocide of their people? And I think that's an important question. So if I had to start, I would say I'm not sure really what we can do, but what I have been trying to do is just to keep talking about it, not let it die down, not let it be silenced, keep exposing atrocities as they are happening. And I don't know if anybody else has any other advice.
I just thought about that and I don't know what the answer is either, but it just struck me that when we went to the Genocide Museum in Halabja, there was a statue to the first journalist to go there after that genocide happened and tell the world what happened. Here, we're watching it in real time. We're watching people be killed every day in Gaza in real time. And that just is so heartbreaking that we can't do anything. I mean, we're doing things, but we need to do more. It's just, wow. I mean, it's good that we know about it, but it's just maddening. Yeah, the journalists that are there, right?
Hey.
Call your
Shireen,
representatives. That's very important.
I wanted to pick up just on one thing when you were all talking about particularly the government. I think one thing that perhaps we've all overlooked, all of us who advocated for Yassin and for Mohammed, but mostly for Yassin, we are forgetting the time frame in which the case took place. The United States invaded Iraq on March 19th, 2003. And I see a lot of you who were very active in the anti-war movement, as I was, which is why I became interested in this in the first place, in the case. We need to see all these years later, that whole case, not certainly, the rest of the Muslim cases as well, as we know what happened, but we need to see the case in terms of war fever. Our country was at war with Iraq, and here was an Iraqi. Didn't matter to the government whether he was from northern Iraq or southern Iraq, he was still an Iraqi. And I think that was part of it, and that ties into the general feeling that we're in now, which is you can't sit by and you can't watch and you can't do nothing. We were complicit directly. And I think that's why our government decided to target an Iraqi who might have been a terrorist here on the shores of the US, much like the Japanese internment in World War II. If you looked Japanese, you were a threat. If you were Iraqi, you were a threat. If you were Muslim, you were a threat. And we need to kind of see that, I think, in a historical background. Good to remember history and good to go forward without dragging it with us.
Gene, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're past time. So we need to give our panel here a big round of applause. I hope we can revisit these topics again. You all just need to hang out.
Good job, Alana.
I think I blabbed a little too much.
Oh,
during
hi.
the presentation. How much?
Yeah, years ago at the,
Yeah, I
you taught the stuff in.
Is my mic still on? Friends, somebody in the chat also shared another way to help people in Gaza. And
Facebook friends. Well, because
So somebody in the chat also shared another way to help people in Gaza right at home from your couch, and that is to purchase an eSIM. She has shared the link in the chat, so you can purchase an eSIM for somebody in Gaza so that they can connect with the outside world, because as you know, electricity is being cut off, cell phone service is being cut off. So if you're interested in that, you can check the group chat or just into Google type Gaza eSIMs, it'll come up. It's called eSIMs for Gaza. eSIM, electronic SIM for Gaza. Thanks.
I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Yeah, your phone, put in your phone. For Gaza, eSIMs for Gaza. That's just SIM card. It's like, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's an electronic. Yeah. Stop. And then.